comparing other documents. And then you're going to go through and make that document internally consistent. And what I mean by that is when you compare different handbooks, some of them are worded like company will do this and employee will do that. Some of them are worded like we will do this and you will do that. And so I just want it to read as a consistent document. So go in and change all the we's and you's to company employee or vice versa, however you want yours to read, but just so that it doesn't look like a cut and paste from two different documents, right? Does that make sense? Just make it internally consistent so that your employees look at it and think, wow, my boss is really on top of it. They've already got a professional looking employment policy and I'm only the third employee. That's pretty impressive. It speaks well for you and it helps you avoid problems that come up in those early undefined employment relationships. There will be a couple of provisions that you look at and the wording in each employee handbook is identical. That's because it's a topic that there's a statutory, there's a law on the books and everyone has just used that law verbatim in their employee handbook. There will be others where there's some flexibility or opportunity for you to decide what you want for your company, like company hours or vacation policy or dress code. And in those, you're welcome to look for a dress code that you like and copy paste, or you're welcome to use your creativity and write your own. But this isn't a write your own kind of assignment. It really is a cut and paste assignment. So, if you're just all about copy paste, it's pretty easy. It's due a week from Thursday. I think the hardest part of the assignment is finding the resources to copy from. So maybe get on that early, and I'll encourage you, it's not a competition in this class, everyone who does it gets full points for the assignment. So if you found a good resource, share it in class next time, because that'll help, help other people. And I think that's the hardest part, is finding the open employee handbook resources out there. But they're there if you look for them. You can try Googling employment policy, employee handbook. There's a few, kind of few ways to search it, but you should be able to find the resources, and then it's an easy. Okay, so back to franchising. Any questions about that? Yeah.
With the source, do you usually want to copy the URL later and show you?
Yes, just at the bottom of your employee handbook, sources and your URLs that you used is fine. If you have an employee handbook, a hard copy employee handbook from a job you've had, you're welcome to use that as a source as well. It's not as easy to copy paste. But it may have a paragraph, or it may help you get started to find other things. We'll talk more about it. We've got like 3 more class periods to talk about before it's due that month. Okay, so back to franchising. Just a little bit about franchising, a little mini lecture here so that you have some context. I may even take 1 or 2 big questions from this for the final. But somebody tell me what a franchise is. We hear about it. I'm going to buy a franchise. Somebody franchised or something. What is it? What is a franchise? Just don't look at this. Just tell me, what is a franchise? Be brave.
We often talk about in regards to sports or marketing firms. That's a franchise that's rare, but it has multiple different avenues of distribution of product.
Okay, good. Yeah, so he mentioned sports franchises, which didn't actually come up in the last class, but you've got, the NFL, and they have a certain model and rules to follow. And if you want to be a team, you have to apply, and you use their logos and other things as part of your association with them. Good. Okay. Anything else about franchises? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear franchise? McDonald's or Subway, right? It's really a way of building or expanding a business by getting other people involved to open up units of your business. And so the original creator of the concept is the franchisor. And they've created a business that hopefully has a track record of success. That's best for selling. And then they give opportunities for people to participate in that business model. And we use common terminology. I mean, when we're just talking about it, we talk about buying a franchise or selling a franchise. But that's sort of a misnomer. What we really do is license a franchise. And the difference between buying and licensing is that, you know, title, we talked about title in the last units. Title doesn't pass when you're licensing. The person who started it and created it and owns it keeps all the rights. And the person who comes in and licenses gets basically a permission to use those rights, use that intellectual property, use the model, permission to use without being sued as long as the rules are followed. So a license is a permission. It's not title passing. It's nobody's rights are given up. But somebody gains the rights as long as they follow the rules. Okay? The license relationship allows that franchisor, the person who created the system, to maintain the control and ownership of all of their intellectual property by letting that other party have permission to use it, but not parting ways. So if I were to truly sell a McDonald's franchise to somebody, if I'm McDonald's and I sell instead of licensing, you know, the person who comes in can say, I don't like the golden arches. I'm going to paint them purple, or I'm going to take them down. I'm going to put up my own sign. I'm going to change the menu. I'm going to sell coffee at 180 degrees. To do whatever I want, because now it's mine. But with a license, that can't happen. You still are tied to the franchisor and their rules. This isn't super important, but just a little bit of background. There is a whole spectrum of types of franchises. With, on one end, the most lenient type of franchise is called a trade name franchise. And there's a lot of flexibility to operate. The rules are very lax. It's sort of a loose association of people using the same trade name. Sometimes they have a buying cooperative or some system support. But if you were to look at one trade name franchise compared to the others using the same trade name, you'd see a whole different business that just is unified by the name. So if you think about, for example, Ace Hardware. How many people have seen a little small town Ace Hardware? In your hometown or in a local city, right? If you were to compare 10 Ace Hardwares, you'd find that they're all pretty different. A lot of them started out as small town family-owned hardware stores, and over time they saw the advantage of associating with Ace because it was a brand name people recognized and trusted, because they could get some types of system support and inventory, common inventory, buying cooperative and other things like that. So it's a very loose relationship. The rules are loose. If you go to any different Ace Hardware, sometimes they're even associated with the old family name of the hardware store. You'll see, you know, Bob Jones Ace Hardware or something like that. And their layout is different, but they have some product lines the same, and they have some things that are similar. Car dealerships are like this. Compare 10 Ford dealerships. You're going to find that they all have a different name associated with Ford. Carl Malone, or I don't know, Ken Garf, or whatever it is. They have different uniforms. They have different business layouts. The buildings look all different, but they have the same financing arrangements. They have the same inventory, and they have some of the same promotions. State Farm insurance agent, kind of the same way. Right. So all of those where they use the trade name and associate with a brand, but they also have a lot of flexibility to run their own business the way they want. That's a trade name franchise. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum is something called a business model franchise, and that's a real paint by numbers kind of business, where you go in, you may know nothing about the business, they train you totally exactly what to do, the handbook gives you very specific requirements, all the uniforms are the same, the business itself looks the same. Kind of reminds me of that hot dog on a stick at the mall with the funny hats and the shorty shorts. And like everyone is exactly the same. Every mall you go into, you see hot dog on a stick. They look exactly the same, right? If you dropped out of space into standing in front of hot dog on a stick, you go, I have no idea which one this is because they all look exactly the same. Okay, and there are increments all the way along that spectrum. Great Harvest Bread Company is a good example. My friends own Great Harvest. Good example of a franchise that kind of falls in the middle. It gives the owners some creativity. They have a cooperative where owners can test out recipes and share recipes. Like everything's not dictated. They can decorate the way they want, kind of have their hours of operation, but they also have several things that are consistent about. So if you think that your method of going into business, you want to own your own business, but you don't want to go through all the trial and error of starting from scratch, but you want some guidance, but you also want some flexibility. It's really important to consider that and what kind of business you franchise. Okay, here's just some thoughts about the benefits and the negatives of franchising a business. If you're the franchisee, you're looking for an opportunity and there's several opportunities presented and you decide you want to franchise a business, what are the good things that you get out of that? You get a proven product. You get marketing expertise, right? Whoever created the business to begin with has the marketing down. Hopefully they're helping with the marketing. You get some managerial assistance, maybe some training from the company, how to run this type of business. You're taught how to operate it, and there's a good quality control. Because the company has an incentive to make sure that the franchisees are keeping good quality. But the negatives are you're making a profit, and part of that profit has to go back to the company. If you started your own company from scratch, you get to keep it all. But if you're franchising, you got to give some back. You got to pay your dues, right? Your freedom is a little restricted. If you want to be a business owner because you want to be your own boss and you're creative and you want to do your own ideas, well, the company's going to tell you what ideas you're going to pursue and which ones you can't. They're going to put some restrictions on you. There's always a risk of fraud with franchising. Selling business opportunities, there's always got something. It's always someone that's got something, right, where you're going to make a lot of money and you're going to be on the ground floor. Sometimes businesses will fudge the success that they're actually having in order to get people to pay an upfront royalty for an opportunity that's not really a fully baked opportunity. And so there's potential for scam in selling or buying business opportunities. And if you're a franchisee and you've come into some money, maybe your retirement or an inheritance or your savings or second mortgage on your house, whatever big amount of money you're risking, you want to make sure that you're investing in something that really is proven to be successful, that really does have a system to teach you and help you be successful, and not investing your money in something that's going to collapse as soon as your money's in there and you get nothing back. One of the risks is license termination, because remember, this is a license relationship, not a buy-sell. So that licensor has the right to terminate the license if you step outside of the rules, or maybe just at the end of the term. Maybe you have a 5-year or a 10-year franchise license, and at the end of that 5 or 10 years, they say, you've been a great franchisee, and thanks for putting your whole heart and soul into the business, but we think we'd like to give the opportunity to someone else now. So thanks and good luck. That hurts, right? You want to make sure that you're not at risk of that, and sometimes with some opportunities you are. And then you're also at risk of the other franchisees. You may be running your business with your whole heart and soul. You may be doing everything right. Maybe you're running a Wendy's franchise and it's going really well, and you're sponsoring a local baseball team, and the community loves you, and next thing you know, some McDonald's, some Wendy's in Ohio, there's a finger in somebody's chili, and now your brand is tarnished. Because people are like, what's going on with that, right? I don't know, Wendy's, ooh, gross, I'm not going there. Because somebody on the other side of the country had some bad publicity about something that happened, but you share the same brand, and so that association tarnishes you. So you're at the mercy of other franchisees and how they behave. If you've created a business and you're trying to decide, how do I want to expand? Do I want to keep investing my own money and own all of my units, or do I want to franchise and let other people take that responsibility. Here are some of the positives and negatives from the franchisor's perspective. You can expand with much less capital because other people are bringing capital to the table to own the units that they're going to own. You can have multiple revenue streams. You've got the money coming in from your units of the business, the profit. You've got royalties coming in from other people's business profits. You might have money coming in from bulk purchasing. You know, you can accumulate everybody's purchasing needs and buy at a lower rate, and maybe even sell product back to the franchisees with a little bit of margin. And I think the really great reason to do it is because you have motivated franchisees. If you're franchising and you, if you're expanding and you put all of your dollars into every unit that you expand, and you can't possibly manage 10 units all by yourself, so what do? You hire a manager at each location, right? And you might get a good manager. You might get a manager that's just putting in their time and taking the paycheck. But when you franchise, you've got people with some skin in the game because they're business owners too, and there's sort of a pride of ownership that their location is their business, and they want it to reflect their standards as well as yours. And they have an incentive to be profitable because their business depends on it. And so you have much more motivated franchisees. The negatives are you lose control a little bit because you're handing control over to each of these franchisees. You've got a rule book that they're supposed to follow, and you hope they do, or maybe they don't. You're sharing your profit, right? Instead of getting the full profit from every location, you're getting 10% of the profit. So you need more locations to make a good, good return. But you've got these advantages going for you, and you have less requirements, less demands by each one. There's a huge potential for disputes, and the reason for that is people are investing their life savings a lot of times in an opportunity that they believe will return monthly revenue so that they can survive, right? And if their unit is not profitable, they become grumpy pretty quickly when they're writing a check for royalties to use your intellectual property and it's not successful. And so franchisees who are not successful oftentimes will sue the franchisor for their lack of success. And you kind of got to keep things fresh. If people are writing you a royalty check every month, they want to have new promotions and new ideas and new products. Otherwise, it's kind of the what have you done for me lately attitude, right? I'm still writing you a check every month, but where's the new ideas to keep it fresh? So franchisors have to keep it fresh.
Typically, and you might have mentioned this earlier in your last slide, but typically, like how much of a royalty do?
Yeah, that's what you're going to research. So I'll tell you how to do that. Okay.
I was going to ask what grounds would the franchisee have to sue the franchisor if it was if their branch was not successful?
The grounds would be fraud or misrepresentation of business opportunity. You told me if I invested this much, I could make this much. You told me all your other franchisees were this successful, but it turns out they're not. You promised me training, but really I was at corporate offices for 2 days and it was garbage, and now I don't know how to run this. Anything you can think of, they can complain about. Okay, so this kind of gets now to the heart of the assignment, or the basis for the assignment, what I want you to do. We just finished talking about truth in advertising. The Federal Trade Commission focuses on certain industries and certain types of transactions because people might be more vulnerable, or they might be unsophisticated, or it might be a large sum of money, or it might be things that they can't verify, right? Does this sound like buying a franchise, licensing a franchise? Sure. So the Federal Trade Commission is really involved. This is a big transaction, and they want to make sure that people who are investing life savings, their nest egg, have a fair opportunity to evaluate the business opportunity that they're buying into. So the Federal Trade Commission is involved in these kind of marketing opportunities. They require franchisors to create something called a franchise disclosure document. If you're interested in what is contained in a franchise disclosure document, just go to Wikipedia. franchise disclosure document, and it'll give you the list. It's a good source for that. There are about 20 to 25 items that must be disclosed about the business and the principles behind the business on the franchise disclosure document. Let me give you some examples of what might be required. They're going to require that the owner disclose how many franchises do you have currently, how many of those are suing you currently, what is your background, have you had other franchise systems before, or is this your first one? What's the status of other franchise systems? Did they fail or succeed? Have you had any bankruptcies? What is your employment history or your professional history? Do you have the skills to create a franchise and be successful? Tell us about the management team, who's on the management team and what is their background. What is the total cost to open a franchise? Not just the money that's going to exchange because of the license, but what is the total cost to open a Subway franchise or a McDonald's franchise? Is it $1 million? Is it $500,000? What is, besides paying the franchisor for the rights, I'm getting maybe some of the startup equipment, if that's part of the deal. What does it cost to get into a building, to bring in booths and tables, to bring in a French fry fryer, what is the fully loaded cost of going into this business? What is the upfront fee and the monthly payment associated with the license? What restrictions, any particular restrictions on the franchisees? What are the opportunities in terms of training? What's your training package? Are there any celebrities that endorse this product? And if so, who are they? Is it important to know who the celebrity is or who's endorsing the product? Got some high-profile cases of celebrities doing something dumb and they're endorsing a company and now the company looks bad. I mean, just look at Jared and Subway. He didn't start out as a celebrity, but you want to know something about who is the celebrity that's representing this company. Any financial help that's available, does the company fund? Other things like that. So all of that has to be disclosed in a franchise disclosure document.
So in the Subway case, did the Subway have any grounds to sue Jared for ruining their brand and stuff like that? I mean, because I feel like a lot of stuff that he did might affect their sales.
Yeah, it would be according to contract, whatever their contract they have with him. And typically when you have a person representing a company, there's a morality clause that says, you'll behave in an upstanding manner and do nothing that would embarrass the company. And those are a little bit hard to write, but I would imagine that at some point, initially he was just kind of a customer that had a cool story. Yeah. And then he became like the whole deal. And at some point along that way, I'm sure that he signed a morality clause in order to get a big check. Okay, so this franchise disclosure document breaks down the information about all kinds of franchises. And so what happens is somebody compiles a list called the Franchise 500. And I believe I think it's Inc. magazine, but maybe it's Entrepreneur magazine. I can't remember off the top of my head who does it. Your task, should you choose to accept, is to go look at the Franchise 500, just Google it and it'll come up, the most recent year. Pick a franchise on that list that you would like to research. Maybe you have an interest in it. Maybe it's something that you have back home but we don't have here yet. And you're thinking of franchising it here, or vice versa, okay? And what you're going to see on that Franchise 500 list is some of the top information gleaned from the franchise disclosure document about that opportunity. That's where that information is coming from. And I'm going to give you a list of questions, and I apologize, I thought that it was on the assignment and we could just reactivate it, but it's not showing up. So I'll bring it in hard copy on Thursday, the list of questions, and we'll decide the date that it's due. Side by side, we'll just make sure it's done by the end of the term. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to wrap my head around franchising a little bit more.
Okay.
I was trying to look up some reasons why you want to franchise this company. I can't understand how it's more profitable to franchise. I guess because it's kind of like an annuity, so you get that payment.
Yeah. So what happens if you're going to expand your business by, I'm going to take the profits that I got from my business over this year, and I'm gonna save them until I have enough to open a second location, and then I'm gonna take the profits from all of that and save till I can open a third and a fourth. It takes a long time. And if you've got a really great idea, but you're going at one unit at a time really slowly, someone else is gonna take your idea, maybe not exactly, but something similar, and start it up where they are. So if you want to expand more rapidly, you want a national expansion, but you don't have the capital to do that, franchising is a good opportunity, because it means that you put the idea out there along with a much smaller dollar amount, and people come along and say, hey, this person's tested this, they know it's a proven brand or product, I can invest, and then I don't have the whole trial and error and the potential to lose my business. I'm working off of someone else's success. And so you can expand the units much more quickly, because many more people will invest and open their own unit. So you're not getting as much profit from each one, but you have more, so it accumulates.
So like,
Make
is
sense?
something that a company could do, like, put like a repurchase clause of like 10 years in there, and then 10 years down the road, when they've passed their period of hyper growth, they can purchase all those back and get that higher income again?
Yeah, I mean, they would have to lay out the money to do that, but let me give you a couple of recent examples of that happening. Hoagie Yogi started out by franchising. After a while, they decided they didn't like dealing with difficult franchisees, and they started buying back. When the franchise term was up, they would buy out the assets that the franchisee had put into it, like if they bought fixtures or other things, and they would buy it back. Gold's Gym just recently turned to Busm. Gold's was a franchise out of California. My bishop owns it, so I know the whole deal. He bought the rights to Gold's Gym in Utah, and he started opening all these locations, but he didn't, after a while, didn't like that model. And if you were under Gold's Gym where you sign a contract and then you were just stuck, and he didn't like that so much. So after time, he amassed enough money to buy all the rights for all those units away from Gold's Gym and just own his own company and turn it into Vasa. Now it's a month-to-month kind of thing, and it's been a good, it was a good decision. It was really tricky to wait and buy out, because he had to, in order to do it all at once, he had to buy out some of the contracts that had a long term, and he just had to buy, finish paying them off so he could. But so it was expensive, but I think it was a good business decision. So you can certainly do that. It's rare that it happens, but it does happen. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the franchise disclosure document, the purpose of it is to allow someone who's interested in investing to look at a few different franchises and compare them on an apples-to-apples basis. I'm going to compare the ownership teams or the management teams. I'm going to compare the investment. I'm going to compare how many units they have, how much experience they have. I'm going to compare how much training they're going to give me, and then you can make a more informed decision, right? Whereas if you don't have that opportunity to break it down and look at each detail in comparison, it can be really overwhelming to make a decision about investing in a business. So that's the FTC's requirement and contribution. Here's what the law says. The law has changed, fortunately, because the old law used to be that you couldn't give the disclosure document until somebody had signed. It was just weird. It was backwards. Now we say, as long as you've provided the disclosure document 14 days before you finalize the license, you're within the law. So you can hand out the disclosure document, you make people sign for it and date it so you know when they received it, then you have to wait 2 weeks, and then you can conclude the opportunity. It's to force people to really evaluate. Franchise disclosure documents are a pretty thick document. By the time you hit 22 topics and discuss them in depth about your business. And so it really gives people the time to evaluate and make sure it protects the franchisor, because the franchisee can't come back later and say, I didn't know this was part of the business. I didn't know I was going to have to pay for this. Yep, it's all in the franchise disclosure document, and you had 2 weeks to review it, and then you bought the business. And so it's a protection for the franchisor and the franchisee. But because it's an advertisement right? It's a solicitation for an investment. Truth in advertising applies to these franchise disclosure documents. If you are talking about what can the average franchisee expect in terms of return on investment, you better make sure you're talking in terms of averages and not showing your very best case scenario. You know, net impression of the average consumer applies. So the truth in advertising, you can't put things in the franchise disclosure document that would be unfair or misleading or false. So truth in advertising applies. State law registrations requirements vary. So the FTC just says you have to have met these factors on the franchise disclosure document. You have to have given them 14 days opportunity to review it before they enter a transaction. Ready, set, go. States will say, if we want to know what's going on in our state, we want to know who's offering business opportunities in our state. So you need to register with the state, and some states have really onerous registration requirements, like California. They do their whole separate set of things in addition to the franchise disclosure document. Utah, for example, says, hey, Utah, $500 and supply a copy of your franchise disclosure document and we're good. And most states are like that. About half the states have some sort of registration requirements. Half the states just say, whatever the FTC does is fine, we're good with that. So if you're wanting to franchise nationally, most people create their FDD and then they comply with California law, and then they figure everything else is a lower standard than that. So we're good. Yeah.
Is there a third party that kind of like audits the disclosure document? To make sure they're making a good statement and like maybe the claims are valid? Or...
Well, the FTC doesn't necessarily audit it or even require to see a copy of it. They just require that you have it. And so if a business is investigated and they turns out they're selling business opportunities and they don't have proof that they've had one, then the FTC will come after them. But states, that's kind of what the state requirement is about, is the state will go through and look at it. They won't necessarily audit it, but they have varying levels of scrutiny on that document, and that's what you pay the fee for the state to look at it and maybe ask you some questions about it. And other states are like, yeah, whatever the FTC does, it's fine with us. Yeah.
So my husband and I actually bought a franchise out of Canada.
Oh.
So
what was it?
It was a telecommunications consulting business, and so I'm just wondering. I mean, we did it in New York, and they have franchises all over the U.S. now.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
So when they come into the U.S., they have to look at, well, what are the laws in the U.S.? Okay, we have to create a franchise disclosure document, and we have to register in every state that requires it. And as long as they did that, it doesn't matter that they originated out of Canada.
Okay. So they would have registered.
They would have registered, yeah. And you know, I don't know about all of Canada, but I know Alberta has some pretty strict franchising laws, for example. So
this is Ontario, but yeah,
but if somebody from here decided, hey, now I'm going to expand into Canada, they have similar requirements that we do.
Okay.
At least in Alberta, I know there's a registration requirement. I don't know about the other areas. But that's okay, as long as if you're foreign but you come in and you comply with all the laws, that's okay. Yeah. Okay, so what you're going to do is go to that Franchise 500 list, pick a franchise you like. I'll give you the list of questions that come off of the franchise disclosure document. And oh, you're the best. She's the best. Hey, what interests you about running this type of business? What is the franchise fee for this business? What is the total investment? How many units does the company have? Are they actively expanding in the U.S. and foreign? All this is going to be on the chart. Are you permitted to run more than one unit? If permitted, is it common in this company for the franchisees to have more than one? What conclusions do you draw about that? We can talk a little bit about that if you want to. Must you be owner-operated, or can you be an absentee owner? Hey, a lot of people think, I'm going to buy a franchise, I'm going to have a bunch of college kids run it, and then I'm going to go tour the world, right? Sounds perfect, right? You're going to have a revenue stream, no more work for you, it's just great. But remember, what was the incentive for the franchisor? Was to have motivated franchisees with skin in the game and not just hire a manager. So some systems are going to say you have to be an owner-operator. You have to be involved in the daily operations. Others will say, it's a simple business. Let someone run it, go do what you want. That's fine. We just wanted to expand fast. If you had an opportunity to interview a franchisee, what would you want to know? That requires a little thinking. And based on what you found out, would you pursue this opportunity, why or why not? So that's the assignment. I'll make sure you have copies of it on Thursday. We'll give you a deadline out probably, a couple of weeks, because I don't want it to conflict with the employee handbook assignment that's due next week. It's up there now? Awesome, where is it? Okay, there you have it. It's online, so you can work on it anytime. But that's the background for why this information is out there to be collected, that allows you to compare and contrast. And the question, we'll just ask you this while we're doing this, and then you can think about it for your unit. Are you permitted to run more than one unit? If I have McDonald's, can I have 3 McDonald's, or am I limited to 1 McDonald's? If it's permitted, is it common within the system? So is it common that, what percentage of the franchisees in that system own more than one? So let's say you look at McDonald's and you find out that on average, 80% of McDonald's franchisees own more than one. What conclusion do you draw? What do you think that tells you about that opportunity? Could be a couple questions.
I was gonna say, if there's more than one, if they own more than one, it's likely that they only started with one, and it was a good opportunity, so they're going to own more, and it's clearly lucrative, so they keep buying more.
Yeah, it's lucrative and it's successful, and they keep buying more. Is there an opposite conclusion you could come to?
Can't survive just running one.
You can't survive just running one. I've invested in this, and I know this system now, but gosh, one unit just doesn't give me enough income. I need to own 5 to make this worthwhile. So look at your individual choice and see which you think it is, or what. Maybe you have another conclusion to draw, or maybe you find some information about it, so that you can analyze that and see what you think. So that's the assignment. It's up under the assignment. We'll pick a due date out there somewhere and let you know when that's going to be. And it's 3 points extra credit if you want to do it. If not, no worries. I'd probably take a couple questions from this on the final, like, what's the relationship? It's a license. Why does that matter? Or, how long do you have to give the franchise disclosure document before you can enter the transaction? Big takeaway kind of things. But this will be posted. So there you go. There's a little mini lecture on franchising. And now I just want to take a minute to talk about employment. Just like this for a second, because that's our next unit. When you begin to staff a business, a lot of times the staffing happens, it's kind of an organic process. You're doing too much in your business, you've got to get some help. Maybe you bring in a roommate to have you do some stuff, your brother, your friend growing up, your girlfriend, or your wife, whatever. But then it expands beyond that, and you've got to figure out what that relationship is. And a lot of times it kind of creeps from being an independent contractor. Hey, do this job for me and I'll give you $500. Come in on the inventory on the weekend and help me take inventory and I'll give you $100. Hey, help me with the website and I'll, whatever the trade-off is. But pretty soon it's a more consistent relationship where the person's getting paid on a regular basis and has some defined duties. And then it becomes unclear. Well, was that intended to be an employment relationship? Are they just a contractor that's helping the business at times on a project basis for pay? Or what is the relationship? So the first place I want to start when we talk about employment is the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. Okay? Because a lot of times people don't realize that those are both options. The big case on this is a Microsoft case, where they had 2 divisions. They have lots of divisions, but there were 2 divisions that were similar. One of it started, they hired all the employees, put them in this, in this division to do a certain task for the company. And then when they had a similar need, they decided to get smart and say, gosh, we're spending a lot on employee payroll issues, and it would be just a lot cheaper, and benefits and other things, and it would just be a lot cheaper to make them independent contractors. So when we start this division, we're just going to hire everyone on a contract basis. We'll tell them, hey, these are your duties, and they can be in this building, and we'll treat this building differently than that building. Well, anytime you treat anyone differently than anyone in a workplace scenario, you're headed for trouble. So that's the big takeaway in employment law. Don't treat people differently. The workers in the second division started getting wind of the fact that their experience at work was very similar than the guys in the first division, but the first division were getting benefits, and the second division wasn't, because they were contractors, excuse me. So at some point they sued and said, hey, everything we do is exactly the same. We get the same pay rate. We show up at the same time. We go home at the same time. We have very similar building, very similar responsibilities, but we don't get benefits and those guys do. How come? Hey, IRS, would you look into this for us? And Microsoft got a really big slap on the wrist over that, because the relationships were found to be really identical, but the pay was different. So the IRS has a number of rules or questions that they will ask in a working relationship to determine if the person is an employee or an independent contractor. Now we know the one negative about having employees is that you can be sued when they do something wrong, right? We just learned that in torts. So there is sometimes an incentive to have an independent contractor. The other thing that you may not know, but how many of you have worked on a W-2 at some point in your life? You get a W-2 at the end of the experience, so you're making $10 an hour, you're working 20 hours a week, but at the end of the week you don't get $200, you get $175 and a little stub that tells you where else the rest of the money went, right? FICA, FUTA, Social Security, Medicare, whatever, state tax. What you probably didn't know is that that $25 that your employer withheld to pay government authorities, they match that. So if you're a $10 an hour employee, you're really a $10.25 an hour employee to the employer. They're paying an additional amount besides what's withheld. They match that and turn them in together. So there's some financial incentives in not having employees. The other thing that might be advantageous to a company is that once you hire an employee, they're dedicated for a certain period of time every week, probably 40 hours a week. And they have, a desk and a computer, and they require someone in HR to support them, and there are a lot more expenses to an employee than just their salary. Some people say that an employee costs 50% more than their salary in terms of overhead, office space, and other things. So there's some incentives to hire people on a contract basis, because maybe you only need them 10 hours this week, but maybe next week you need them 50. And so you can adjust that. So here's what the IRS looks at. Now, anytime we have a government agency involved, they're responding to regulations. The regulations are designed to protect whom? Consumers that are what? Or employees that are what? Unintelligent. Yes, we hate to use that word. Unsophisticated, unintelligent, uninformed, emotional. Right? We have a whole concept about what government regulations are designed to protect. So IRS is same rules. Okay. Sorry, can't see it. So here are some rules, or some questions that the IRS is going to ask. So you can see a little except number 16. Don't worry about that. It's kind of a complicated question, so let's just look at that. Is the worker required to comply with instructions about when, where, or how the work is done? So let's mentally picture someone who does web development for the company. They're creating the company's website. You hire them because they have expertise in website development and you don't. Okay, so are you going to tell that person when, where, and how to do the work of creating a website if you're hiring their expertise and you don't know? You leave it to them. They're the expert. You say, gosh, I need a website. Here's some ideas. Here's some pictures that might be good. And here's the date by when I hope to have it done. And here's how much I can pay, right? But you're not telling them, exactly how to lay it out. That's their expertise that you're hiring. Is the worker providing training that would enable him or her to perform the job in a particular method or manner? Are you training this person how to do website development? How to create a website? No, you hired them because they already know, right? You're not training them how to do it. Are the services provided by the worker an integral part of the business operations? Now, the website itself is probably an integral part of business operations. But getting it set up to begin with, you're not in the business of selling websites, right? You're in the business of selling widgets. You just need someone to create your website. Must the services be rendered personally, or can the person you hire someone else to help them? Does the business hire supervisor or pay assistants? In the Microsoft case, some of the contractors were the executives, some of the contractors were their assistants, and so that hierarchy was there, that support staff was being provided by Microsoft. Is there continuing relationship between the worker and the person for whom the services are performed? Does the recipient of the services set the work schedule? All these questions boil down to how much control does the company have over the worker, and how the worker does its work, when the worker does its work, how the worker is paid for the work, all that. Does it look like an employment relationship? Now let me help you out here. The book boils these 20 questions down to 12. The IRS officially has the 20. If you read the book and you're comfortable with that, you could recognize the 12, you're in good shape. So don't do more work than you have to do. The hard thing about the IRS is that it's not a very clean line. You see there's 20 things here. You would think if the IRS came in and investigated a working situation to determine if they were contractors or employees, they would say, well, there's 20 items and 8 went one way and 12 went the other way, so therefore this one wins, right? But not the IRS, because the IRS can go and weight different things according to what they think is important in that situation. And they can say, well, you did good on 19 of them, but this number 20 is really, really, really critical in this situation, so we think they're an employee. So how's a business owner supposed to sort this out? How are you supposed to figure out what to do? You've got this complicated list. We only made it through 6 of them, right? Because then they were too boring to talk about. And it's a lot of stuff. Could be 12 items, could be 20 items. So let me tell you how businesses, how you can figure it out. What are the strategies for business owners when you're looking at your relationship with your workers to make sure that if you intend someone to be an independent contractor, that they actually feel and look like an independent contractor? How can you be sure of that? Well, it ought to look like a business-to-business relationship. Forget that they're maybe an individual. Do they behave like a separate business that's selling services to your business? Okay, here's some ideas how to have that happen. First of all, make a contract with them that says they're an independent contractor. Okay, make it really clear. When we looked that day in contracts, when we looked at that agreement that I had up on the board, that was an independent contractor agreement. It talked about the fact that it was a work made for hire agreement, that the company was going to own the work, that the person was responsible for getting their own taxes and paying their own workers' compensation and everything else. So it was clear that this was an independent relationship. Next, the person should actually bill the business for the services rendered. If I do a week's worth of work, then I should come up with an invoice at the end of the week that says I did a week's worth of work and give it to accounts payable and get a check that way. The problem that Microsoft had and the problem that a lot of small businesses fall into is it's like, well, we'll just run it through payroll. When they cut the payroll checks, we'll just cut you a check too. That'll be much simpler. But the problem with that is then suddenly that person starts looking like an employee because they're getting a paycheck just like the other employees. But if you make the contractor give you an invoice at regular intervals and you pay against that invoice, what does that look like? It's like business to business, right? Yeah, so anything you can do to legitimize that business to business relationship. The person should be required to have their own workers' compensation coverage. When you sign the contract within the independent contractor agreement, you state that right there. We don't supply workers' compensation. You have to go get that yourself. You agree. Some companies will even make that person come back with a certificate showing that they've insured themselves, so that there's no question about it. As much independence as possible should be given in areas such as hours worked, where the job is to be performed. Okay, think about it. If this is a business-to-business relationship, you don't give them a computer in your place of work for them to do their work. You expect them to have their own computer, their own desk, their own location. Maybe it's at home, that's okay. Maybe you give them a temporary cubicle in the office because it makes sense, the type of work being done. If they're a security guard, they probably have a booth where they come in and do their security. They can't do that from home. But it's kind of case specific, but the more that they bring their own tools, their own expertise, their own equipment, it just, it wouldn't make sense if you're supplying everything that they need to do the job when you're hiring them as a separate business. But the more that they have their own tools and their own freedom to operate, the better. So they're not going to provide their own tool supplies, training, or transportation. You're hiring them. If you train them, it doesn't really make sense that they're a separate business, right? And you might need to train them a little bit on the nuances in your workplace, but you wouldn't train them how to do the job you're hiring them to do. So all of those are, I think, a better way of trying to determine if that employee is an independent contractor than IRS's complicated 20 questions. Think about the relationship and treat it like they're a separate business, with a separate invoice, with their separate tools and expertise. And that will help you not run afoul of this. Now, the last paragraph says, the ultimate safeguard is to complete Form S-88, which asks the IRS for a determination if the person is an employee. Do you think most companies go to the IRS and say, excuse me, could you come look at my workplace and tell me what you think? Do you think most companies do that? No. Who do you think fills out Form SS-8 asking the IRS to come in and investigate? It's the employee, right? It's the worker that says, gosh, I just noticed I don't get benefits and everyone else does. I think I want the IRS to take a look at this relationship and tell the company that I'm actually an employee and that I should be treated the same. The other way this comes up, I think I've got this at the top. Okay, first question, who determines? It's the IRS. The second question, how will a business that misclassifies an employee as an independent contractor get caught? The IRS may audit the business. If they see that you're Microsoft and that you've had problems in this area before, they're likely to come in and look. If they see that you're a business that's doing a significant amount of sales volume but you have no employees, they're probably going to come look. So they may audit the business to see. The real way that businesses get caught is an employee, or sorry, I should say a worker gets hurt on the job. They're actually an independent contractor. But they go to workers' compensation and file a claim, saying, I was hurt while I was working, and this is where I work. Well, workers' compensation then is going to come back to the company and say, this worker says they worked for you and that they were hurt in your workplace. But we have no record that you've been paying benefits for workers' compensation for this person. What's the deal? And the company says, oh, they're an independent contractor, it's no problem. And unemployment or employee, what am I trying to say? The workers' compensation goes back to that employee, that worker, and says, I'm sorry, you're not an employee, you're an independent contractor. You were supposed to do that yourself, you didn't, you're out of luck. And that worker says, gosh, I sure feel like I was treated a lot like all the other employees. I'm going to just ask the IRS if maybe I should get workers' compensation. Or it could be a claim for unemployment, same thing. Or it could be the company. The company's, you know, like, gosh, we're in this undefined situation, we need to figure it out before something happens. Maybe the company will do that. But it's typically someone who thought they should have gotten benefits and didn't. The third question, and this is a big one. Word documents are awkward. What are the consequences of being caught having an independent contractor reclassified as an employee? The consequences are that you've got to go back and pay what you should have withheld from that employee's paycheck and the employer match contribution. Now you're responsible for both. You can't go back to that employee and say, gosh, I overpaid you because I didn't withhold. The employee gets to keep everything they were paid. You got to make up that missing piece that you didn't withhold plus your part and turn it in. Then you've got to pay a penalty equal to that amount. So basically, not only is your contribution doubled because you have to put the employee's piece in too, but then it's doubled again as a penalty. And then you have to pay interest on however long it's been that they were misclassified. So it's a huge, huge, huge penalty. You have to go back and retroactively make it right.
Does the contractor turned employee get refunded for what he paid in taxes that he didn't do?
You know, that's a good question. I don't quite know how that shakes out. Usually if you're an independent contractor, you're paying, not always do they register and pay as they should for self-employment tax, which covers those things. Sometimes you just, so it would depend on whether they've set up their own, you know, Social Security and actually had workers' compensation and other things. They did, probably good news for you, because look at the last one. The business may be required to support the injured person for the rest of their life. If they were found to be an employee, they got hurt on the job, you never treated them as an employee, so you never signed them up for workers' compensation, which is the fund that supports people injured in the workplace for the rest of their life, then that responsibility falls to you as the employer, and that's could be pretty ugly.
She get hurt, but you don't report it, because like my brother-in-law just kind of got hurt on the job. He didn't want to get like he's a firefighter, and he didn't report it right away. And like, oh, you didn't report it right away, so we're not gonna like cover you basically.
Yeah, you kind of have to report it right away, because otherwise they question whether or not it really happened on the job. They figure if it happened on the job, someone would have seen it or known about it. And
so if someone did see his captain saw it, does captain didn't report it or do anything?
Oh, well, if it was made known at the time, if someone in the company knew about it and didn't report it to up the ladder, that's kind of weird. You know, then yes, if it was known to somebody in the company, like his supervisor, and then
the supervisor didn't say anything, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. I can maybe pursue that a little bit. And have you ever had a situation where you go to the doctor now, they always ask where you hurt at work? Because they're looking at like who can they get taken from if workers' compensation is part of it. So the penalties are pretty stiff. The penalties are pretty stiff. Of making up all of that back amount that should have been withheld and paid to the government. And the government looks at that as the employee's money. And so that's why they make the penalties so stiff, because they look at it as if you, the employer, were handing on to the employee's money when it should have been put into a fund where it would benefit them in the future, and you were holding someone else's money, so that's why they double the penalty. It's pretty strong penalty.
The penalty is paid to the IRS, not to the employee though.
Right, it's paid to the IRS to get them caught up for, you know, it's paid to the IRS.
Yeah.
But ultimately then the employee is in the situation to collect Social Security or workers' compensation or whatever if it should arise in the future. So you're kind of trying to repay that trust account that's in that employee's name with the government, if that makes sense.
What about if the employee actually paid all that? You know, like, so they were a contractor.
That was his question too. So I don't know how that sorts out. If the employee was told they were a contractor, they behaved as a contractor, and they had been paying it all along, I think that's really strong evidence that it was a contractor relationship because they were behaving. I mean, it's kind of hard for the worker, I keep wanting to say employee, but it's kind of hard for the worker to have been paying in the whole time as if they were an independent contractor, and then come back and say, I wasn't an independent contractor, I was an employee. I think that's evidence against that argument, that they were paying taxes as if they were independent when they weren't. Okay, so then let's go back to where we started. The IRS looks at all this, maybe we already said this. The IRS looks at all this, they balance it out, and they just say, you know what, it's a tie, it's a toss-up. We don't know how to sort this out. It is so close to the line that we've got to have a tiebreaker. What do you suppose their tiebreaker is? Who are they designed to protect in this case? Probably the employee. And it's not just because they get more taxes. I know we're suspicious of the IRS. They don't find employment status just so that they can collect all these penalties. Their objective is that the lower paid the worker, the more unsophisticated, uneducated, lower ranking the position, the more likely they're going to find employment because they're protecting the unsophisticated, the weakest among us, right? So that would be the thing that tips the scales. If that worker looks like they're lower ranking, doing just sort of the grunt labor of the company, it's really probably unlikely that the company would have hired that person's expertise as a separate business. So, you know, the poorer, the lower the wage category, the lower the rank of the employee, the more likely the IRS is going to weight the factors in favor of benefiting that person with employment status. Okay. Yeah.
So my husband worked for a company that was out of Canada. It's a different company. And in
Lots
Canada,
of connections up there like me.
Yeah, in Canada, everybody was a contractor, and they were in upstate New York. They were a natural gas drilling company, and they had lots and lots of contractors, including my husband.
Right.
And when the IRS came in and said, I don't think so, they actually just said, you know, it may have been a contractor position in the beginning, but it now looks like an employee, so they didn't actually fine them, they just said, you have to start.
Starting now.
Starting now, they
and that's probably a valid example, because so often they start out as, it was legitimate to begin with, but then it's changed over time, and now it's murky, and we don't know. And so, if it's pretty obvious, the IRS will go back. The Microsoft case was really hard on Microsoft, because they just said, look, they're like carbon copies of each other, and one's getting treated this way and one's getting treated that way. How can you even justify it? And they couldn't, and that was kind of a groundbreaking case, because after that everyone was like, whoa. But more often than not, it's the situation where it morphs over time. And it just becomes easier to just throw in their check with payroll because we're writing checks anyway on Friday. And you know, well, we may as well give them a desk, because then we can, you know, and then the IRS, and that's a good example. If the IRS can't come in and be reasonable and say, it's changed over time, let's make it official and going forward.
Well,
don't worry about the penalties, just going forward, we fix it.
And it was interesting, because in the unsophisticated thing, my husband was being paid very, very, very well, and so he actually wasn't required to become an employee, because they must have looked at.
Because they looked at,
Yeah,
and if
they
he's got
said,
expertise and he's got skills that aren't core to the business, but an important part of the business, that you would hire. The other thing about this is that, and class dismissed. The last thing as you're packing up your books is that some industries get away with more than others by the nature of the industry. So.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? An alarm has been activated in the building. Please proceed to the stairways and exit the building.